Hello, everybody. So I'm Keith Taylor. I'm with the Ostrom Workshop at Indiana University. And up to this point, I think a lot of the conversation's been about the state of the platform co-ops. And I'm going to be a little different here in what I'm presenting. I'm going to be talking about the state of the U.S. co-op sector. This is the area that I research. I focus most specifically on the electric and food co-op sectors, a little bit on the purchasing, but I've got a broad knowledge in terms of what's going on. And one thing I want to pose to everybody here just to think about is, we've been talking a lot about bootstrapping to get to where we need to. And maybe we don't need the bootstrap, and you think about, good God, the situation that we're in now with the Trump administration coming in, I don't want to have to start from scratch in anything. Is there something we could latch on to? Is there something that we could latch on to that has local autonomy, that we could hit national market and economic power, and resilient to system shocks? What about something that's beyond just a state and market as well, and something that's even beyond just the left and right in the United States? But even then, I think about all the precariousness of having to deal with the state. What if we could actually develop policy in our local communities that scales up and actually implements policy at the national and international levels? And I make the case that the U.S. co-op sector is actually that latent community capacity that can get us there if we were to strategically engage with it. So I want to just contextualize for folks a little bit about the U.S. co-op sector. If you're someone like me and my friend Matt Kropp over there, then you've seen this map thousands of times. And this map was done by the University of Wisconsin Center for Co-ops. It's from the census that they did in 2007. If you want to know why you don't know a lot about U.S. co-ops, it's because we only do census about co-ops every 20 years, it seems. And even then, we don't have a federal registry that's collecting information on them. So it's a little shocking. But to contextualize the U.S. co-op sector for everybody here, 150 million Americans are a member of at least one cooperative. 150 million Americans. That's more than the NRA. That's more than the ARP. That's a big number. Of those 150 million Americans, there's a total of 350 million memberships. So again, people like me and my pal Matt, we have 3-4 co-op memberships, right? We're co-op crazy on this stuff. There are 30,000 co-ops in the United States, generating over $3 trillion in revenue. 3 trillion? Anyone ever think about that? That's a lot of money. 70,000 people work for these co-ops. So it's a pretty big movement. Now, to break it down even further for you, you see this map, it's a bunch of dots and all this kind of stuff. It's representing a number of sectors. So telco, a lot of us in here want to have free open internet. Well, there are telco co-ops out there. There's over 400 of them, and they're in mostly rural places. Electric co-ops, there's 905 electric co-ops owned by 42 million Americans. They were built by rural folks. So when people say you can't self-govern and you can't put your own communities together, you have to look at the rural electric co-ops. They built it themselves. Now, it was through help with the federal government that provides seed funding, but there's all these wonderful images out there of rural electric co-ops that are being built out of the back of pickup trucks with spools of electric line coming out and the farmers putting the poles in together. Credit unions, there's over 6,000 of them in the United States, and they have about 10% of the consumer finance market. So you don't like the big banks? There's a credit union in your backyard. Food co-ops, I think a lot of people, when they think about co-ops in the United States, they tend to think about the food co-ops. There's about 300 of them out there. Worker co-ops continue to rise, especially with the platform co-op movement. There's also a big movement with the worker co-ops right now with regard to conversions. There's some scary numbers that show that there's greater consolidation going on in big corporations. This is everywhere in the world. But there's a movement in the United States to preserve the small businesses by converting them over to worker co-op. One particular example I can think of that's really inspiring is Namaste Solar Co-op, headquartered out of Denver, Colorado. Look them up, look at their model. It's fantastic. Then I think that people are aware of agriculture co-ops, but they don't know about the scale, how big they are. There's Land O'Lakes, that's an ag co-op. Ocean Spray is an ag co-op. And they have enormous influence in national policy. When you guys hear about the agriculture bill, the farm bill that goes through in the United States, it's the ag co-ops that are pushing a lot of that. And then there's also purchasing cooperatives, which I think is the big hidden sector in the United States. Purchasing co-ops are enormous. Whenever you see a small business that's nearby a big box store and you're wondering how the hell does it compete, it's typically because behind the scenes they have a purchasing co-op. So Ace Hardware stores, that's a purchasing co-op. They're able to compete against Home Depot and Lowe's. It's fantastic. CCA Global is probably the biggest purchasing co-op out there. You've probably never heard of them. And CCA Global, they own the Carpet One stores. So again, who really cares about these Carpet One stores, right? I don't know about you, but if I ever get titling, it's probably once in my life. But the thing is, they're able to survive because they're part of this purchasing co-op sector. But with that, there's all these great things that are going on in the sector, and you've got to be asking, then why the hell am I not hearing about this? And it's because there are definitely fractures that are going on in the U.S. co-op economy that we all need to be aware of, and we need to get involved in, not only to help with the platform co-op movement itself, but also in order to further the prosperity of that co-op sector as well. So I think probably to me, one of the biggest concerns is the depoliticization of the co-op sector. Frequently, if you go to these co-ops and you say, why aren't you addressing this policy? Why aren't you addressing something with environmental sustainability or poverty in our area? And they'll say, well, that's a lefty thing. Or, that's something I don't want to get involved in. The problem is that means they're removing themselves from the political debate. And we know that the corporations are not removing themselves from the debate. This has resulted in severe policy disparity for many of our co-ops. They're on the sidelines. So right now, the credit unions have been pushing this, don't tax my credit union, right? And there's a lot of reasons why it is we don't tax our co-ops the way we tax investor-owned firms. But what that does is allows the investor-owned banks to go, look at these schmucks, they're not paying their taxes, we are, right? So what we need is we need our credit unions to step up and say, tax the hell out of these guys, and we're going to provide all these extra services in our community. And I'll get around to that. But this policy disparity also then results in something else I think is really interesting. If you look at the heartland of the United States, the prairie states, from Texas all the way up to Canada, this is rural electric co-op service territory. And this area here has not been developing wind energy. The co-ops are out of the picture. But the investor-owns are coming into this service territory and developing it. It's because they have incentives from the federal government. They get subsidies to do this, your tax dollars. The co-ops do not. And so they're staying out of this discussion. But I think that what we need to realize is that despite some of the problems, there's latent community capacity in this. We have an enormous finance sector in the co-op sector. CoBank is a $100 billion ag bank in this area. The electric co-ops actually have an IT co-op. Check them out, nisc.coop. It's a fantastic firm. They're credit unions. They're doing a number of poverty alleviation programs that are taking on the payday lenders by offering programs that look like payday lending, but actually get people to take the interest and save it. So it moves people off those payday lending rolls. And then we were talking about data here as well. A lot of these firms in the utility sector have access to data, consumer behavior, that if we could harness, then we could help out with this new movement in the platform co-ops. So to conclude, I want you to think in terms of the engagement potential of this and new organizing methods. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in this, folks, if your co-op if you get upset with them. What I would encourage you all to do is engage the membership, the management at your local co-op. You'd be surprised at how many of them will come over to your point of view and we'll talk about these new policies. They just haven't had people engage them. And frankly, if they don't want to talk to the members, if they don't want to reflect the policies, you own it. You own your co-op. So you can get involved with them. The co-ops actually have this saying at the association level. When one member steps up, they can have enormous influence not only at their local co-op, but through the entire chain. They call it the Army of One. And this is a standard saying. So if you think your one voice can't matter in your co-op, you just got the evidence goes against that. And then from there, if you go and you lead a member effort to democratize your co-op and have some influence, know that they're typically connected to federations at the state and national level. So your voice can be elevated in your rural community to the national and international level. So there's enormous potential here in the United States that I don't think that we're quite yet tapping. And I think there's a greater strategy here in how we can engage this in order to grow the platform co-op sector. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. This is great.
Thanks.